Hello and welcome into the Fog.net podcast. My name is Michael Swain, the Kansas beat writer for 24/7 Sports. Here it is. It's a Sunday night. We're running out of Sunday nights here to talk about Kansas football. This is probably our last one because we may record on a Saturday, maybe a Sunday morning, but here
Yeah.
we are with our weekly podcast. I'm joined by Kevin Flaherty from KC Sports Network. We're going to break down KU football's 38-14 loss at Iowa State. There's a lot to talk about, but Kevin, first of all, you're looking a lot redder than when we talked last time. Fill us in on what exactly has transpired.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah. I am okay. Being at a high school game on Friday night got pretty windburned by that, probably a little bit, and then actually being at the Chiefs game today, decided to match the Chiefs colors with my redness, and so I was out there in the lower bowl. Probably took quite a bit of wind to my face that still hadn't recovered, and so I promise you, my face doesn't always look like this. It just mostly usually looks like this, but yeah,
Oh, so
little
you weren't
little
the
little,
shirtless
little beat
guy?
up.
You
What'd you
weren't the
say?
shirtless guy on TV that had like the red
No.
face and like the red body?
I am way too much of a wuss for that. Like it was, I was very much a today I had like my quarter zip thing or whatever that was like a Chiefs quarter zip, and debated for all of about 2 seconds about whether to wear like my coat over the top to walk in, and absolutely wore the coat over the Chiefs colors for a while. So
I love it. That's awesome. Hey, that's a good way to spend a Sunday. That's
yeah,
a
yeah, for sure.
good way to spend a Sunday. All right, let's get into this thing, Kevin. I mean, we can just start at the beginning and talk about the first chunk of the game for KU. Okay, what was your expectation going into this game? Because I was really fascinated to see what KU's like energy level would look like going into this. Walking on the sideline pregame, it's one of those where you feel it's a little chilly, right?
Yeah,
Guys are coming out, they've got their, the wrapping, they've got their layers on like you did at the Chiefs game.
yeah,
And I was really interested to see kind of what the intensity level would look like from this team, just because you think about the times this year where KU's needed to have that. And I just don't know if it's always been there. And then obviously you think back last year, like Baylor, different team,
yeah.
still the same program, and the lack of intensity there. So I was really interested to see what that would look like. But what were you expecting going into this one? And then what did you kind of think of the way that the first kind of three drives played out overall?
Yeah, I expected there to be more intensity. I mean, one, I know that players don't necessarily look at it like this, right? As, hey, this is the last shot, because if you're a college football player, you believe you're going to beat everybody on your schedule. That's just the way that they're wired, right? But at the same time, I think heading into this, the way that the game ended, where you had the defense play really well through most of it, you wind up losing at the end. You have a bye week to kind of sit and marinate on that. It kind of reminded me a little bit of, I think, a year ago, the Arizona State game. Then you had the bye week, and then Houston.
Houston, yeah.
And you remember we talked to Luke Grimm, I think, after the Arizona State loss, I think during media availability. And he was like, well, you really want to get back out there because
Mhm.
you hate the way that you wound up losing at the very end like that. And they came out and played with a lot of intensity against Houston in that game, executed well. And so I think that was what I expected. Was I thought that, hey, coming off the bye week, the one thing that I think Kansas has typically done, it's more than preparation. You and I have talked about it. Kansas usually plays fast coming off of a bye. The aggression levels there, guys are healthier. I think they handle the recovery part of a bye week typically pretty well. And so I expected, when you add that to the way the Arizona game went, the fact they had the stew on that, I expected Kansas to kind of come out with hair on fire in this one. I'll be honest with you, Kansas played with an intensity in that Arizona game that I probably thought would have happened on Saturday, and it didn't wind up
Yeah.
happening.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the comment from Luke. I kind of got the feeling more that I think people felt like getting the bye after Arizona was a good thing,
Yeah,
to kind of recover just from that emotionally,
yeah,
the way that that game ended and everything like that. And so I thought, like you, Kevin, that it'd be KU coming out on fire, and it just was not that. I've written before the game, like, hey, these are kind of the three things I'm looking for. Um, one of the big things I mentioned was like gap discipline. Like, look,
Yeah.
Iowa State, say what you want the passing attack, Rocco Beck struggles. Like, they run the ball pretty well. And then on the first like three plays, it's like busted, like guy out of his gap. They're busting runs, and I was just like, oh great, all right. So it's gonna be one of this game, where KU just like the K State game, right, where KU just looks totally unprepared, and that shows up, I think, in a few ways, Kevin. Right, it couldn't be unprepared to start the game
Yep.
from the lack of intensity. That's one thing, or what's being said or what's being done that guys are coming out and it's not, you know, like let's go type of thing. And then that's also just coming off a bye week when you had a week to prepare. Obviously Iowa State had a bye week as well, but I didn't see anything different from Iowa State compared to what they did against TCU or Arizona State. It's a lot of the same stuff.
Yeah.
And they just were running it, and KU's guys were in the wrong spots and didn't make plays. And that was just something that, and then you watch like the offense, right? You get to an early third down, Jalon completes it to Levi, and then the drive stalls. And it was one of those where for KU top to bottom, you just watched it and was like, this does not look like a team that's coming off of a bye week where they had a week extra to prepare. And now it immediately was like red flag, like this is not looking like it should for a team, again, off a bye week with bowl eligibility on the line. You just didn't see that same intensity I think you expected to see.
Yeah, for sure. And I was one of the people that I thought Kansas would win this game. I really
Mm.
did. I thought the intensity, and I thought the other part of it, Swain, that we haven't talked about yet, is Iowa State being so banged up and being so banged up on the back end in particular. I wasn't sure that Iowa State would be able to execute its defense the way that it typically does under John Haycock. And I know you had a chance to cover John there. I think if you have a Mount Rushmore of Big 12 defensive coordinators, he's on it. And I think when you look at what they do defensively, they do a nice job of, hey, next man up, etc. But you remember what happened a year ago when Kansas faced Iowa State. Iowa State was so banged up defensively, and Kansas goes out and has a really big offensive day. I'm not saying I necessarily expected them to have that kind of day, but I didn't expect a ton of resistance for KU's offense. I thought that KU's offense would probably be in that, say, 27 to 31 range, somewhere around in there, which is not typically easy against an Iowa State team at full health.
Yeah, and we could probably, there's plenty to talk about the defense, and we can get to it.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a lot of the same stuff we've talked about.
Yeah.
But offensively, Kevin, what'd you think of the way that KU was attacking early? And obviously, it's tough because KU one possession in the first quarter, but
Yeah.
generally in the first half, to me, it felt like everything was to the outside, short of the sticks.
Yep.
It did not feel like KU went out and decided, hey, you know what? Iowa State's got its fourth and fifth string corners, its sixth string safety. Like Iowa State had one player on the field, Neal, who was a starter at the beginning of the year.
Yep.
Like that is how banged up their secondary was. And it did not feel like to me that KU went out there and said, let's test them.
Yep.
Right? Was there a warning shot from Jalon or from the offense? There wasn't. They didn't even try. There wasn't any sort of like, all right, and we can talk about it too. Emmanuel Henderson was wide open several times, and Jalon did
Yep.
not see him, did not read the field. And so on the one hand, it's like, okay, a guy got open twice. Jalon, you got to throw the football.
Yep.
And then on the other hand, you can still look throughout the course of the first half, and there's still just there were so many of the routes were short and to the outside. And it's one of those where you're going at secondary. Those guys are loving that,
Yep.
right? If you're in, your second Big 12 start or third Big 12 start for some of them, and you're seeing guys like running in front of you and staying kind of between the line of scrimmage and the sticks, like you're loving that. And so
Yeah.
for KU, it just wasn't one of those where I feel like, man, like they're coming out and wanting to challenge that secondary.
I think another thing too is Kansas hasn't necessarily had receivers who are making plays after the catch,
Mm.
right? You're not seeing them break a tackle and then go do something. And so when you throw short of the sticks, that's the other part of it, right? If you've got Josh Cameron like Baylor does, who, is a fire hydrant at wide receiver, basically, you can throw the 3-yard pass on 3rd and 6 because it's going to be really hard for somebody to tackle him out there. Kansas doesn't really have that guy right now. And I think that's part of it. And I think the other part too is, Swain, a lot of the way that you call plays is to set stuff up for later, obviously.
Mm.
But in this case, I felt like the later was too late in coming, if that makes any sense. And I
Mhm.
think when you had an up close look at Iowa State's defense, obviously covering the Cyclones, but one of the areas I felt like Haycock's defenses are occasionally vulnerable is to double moves, right? Because with the way that the secondary comes up and runs support, and the run responsibilities that those guys have, you occasionally can get those guys, with something down the field and get a vertical shot. And it felt to me like KU was maybe baiting that hook a little bit with some of the shorter stuff, like, hey, let's throw the out, let's throw the out, let's try an out and up type of thing. But with the game state being what it was, with not seeing the ball that much, you can't it makes it really tough to bait that hook when you're like, no, get into the good stuff. Don't, don't run the stuff to set up the stuff later, because there may not be a later where you're still within arm's reach. And I think
Mm.
one of the times that I do remember them kind of stretching the field, if you will, or attempting to, was you had kind of that little slot fade concept that they run where Jalon had, it looked, and the throw was so far off, it looked like a miscommunication, in terms of
Disappointing.
where he threw it like behind the slot guy, and he had somebody open there. But to your point, I thought overall Zabrowski called it a pretty good game. I thought they had open receivers running around and chances to get after the defense. I didn't think Jalon executed it at a very high level in this one, especially in the first half.
No, it was bad. It was really bad. Like, guys wide open, and just like there was one play where I think, he's rolling to his right maybe, and then like Henderson is wide open down the
Yeah,
field. And you can see, at least from my vantage point up in the press box, like it looked like Jalon like looks in his direction and then doesn't throw it and then runs out of bounds. And that was just one of the situations where I'm like, okay, he doesn't have confidence. He
yeah,
just doesn't have confidence. He's not playing with confidence right now. And that is it's such a hard thing to get over, right? If your offensive line and your running game is okay, but Iowa State
yeah,
wants you to do that. And then, of course, the game state means that, yeah, you can't go run the ball a bunch because you got to go score quickly because you're down 17-0 because your offense didn't do anything in the first half.
yeah, for sure.
It's one of those things where you're kind of playing with a hand tied behind your back with the quarterback, not playing with confidence. And then the other one being the game state. And
And
so it's a hard thing to evaluate then when, the offense just is a complete dud in the first half. And then sure, there was, two nice drives in the second half. Great. But at that point it doesn't matter because the game's over, you
yeah,
know.
there have been times this year where Kansas has asked Jalen Daniels to be Superman. Like, let's put it out
For
there,
sure.
like against Missouri for sure. In Cincinnati, another
Mhm.
one. Texas Tech was a game where Jalen had to go out there and try and be Superman. Kansas would have been better off and might have won the game on Saturday. I know that sounds crazy to say when you're talking about a 24-point game, if Jalen just sort of took what was there and didn't try to do too much, was just sort of looked at it as, I hate the term game manager because every quarterback should manage the game, right? But as somebody who just says, hey, these are my weapons. I'm going to distribute this thing. I'm not going to try and do too much. Oh, hey, Cam Pickett's open over there. Okay. I think if Jalen had approached it from that standpoint, this is going to sound really weird, but I think you know what I mean. If he had approached it as a mid-tier Big 12 quarterback, quite frankly, like a Rocco Becht or somebody like that, then Kansas would have been in better shape on Saturday.
Well, Jalen is a mid-tier Big 12 quarterback.
But
Let's be real here.
did he approach it like that?
Yeah. Well, and that's my question. And I don't know the answer to it. But it felt like there were a lot of times where he was just taking the short check down or the
Yeah,
one that's close, right? Where he wasn't trying to go push the ball or take risks, right? It was very much a
yeah,
risk averse type of performance. And obviously in the end he throws a pick. And that was
yeah,
an ugly one.
it
But
was.
it was one of those where like they're if you're going to go on the road and win the Big 12, like you got to take some risks.
You do.
You do. Like especially unless you're Texas Tech and you got a $30 million roster and you can just out talent people. Sure, maybe you don't have to take as many risks. But if you're Kansas or any mid-tier, mid-level Big 12 program, like you got to take some risk. And it just felt like in this game for KU, especially offensively, there was not enough risk taking. And I
Yeah,
understand like if Jalon goes out and tries to throw it to Henderson twice and throws 2 picks, like you're sitting here like, man, just take the open thing. Like it's a catch-22 for him.
sure,
But it's one
sure.
of those where once the game gets to a 2-score game, you just can't be throwing it to the flat on 3rd down to can't pick it, and then it's 4th down, like, and you punt.
Yeah,
Like, you just can't do that. And so that's more where I think my mind's going with this. You gotta take it with the game state,
yeah,
Early in the game, sure, first 2 drives, I get it. Once you're down 14-0 in Ames, like, it's time to go. And I think
yeah,
a great example of that too, Kevin, is the end of the first half.
yeah,
23 seconds, you're down 17-0. Like, at that point, Leipold said post game that he was worried about or concerned that, hey, you had the snap go over Finn Lappin's head. Yeah, he made a great play on
Iowa
it.
State still had their timeouts, he
Yeah,
mentioned.
they still their timeouts. And I would say, yes, totally. I understand if it's a 1-score game or if you're tied or in the lead. Guys, you're down 17.
Yeah,
Like, you gotta try. And I understand, let's just say KU, turns it over and it's a arm punt. Okay. Campbell's probably taking it to half anyway.
yeah,
Like, let's be real here. At that point, you're talking what, 15 seconds? 10 seconds? Like, come on. So that's just another one for me where it's like between, I think what you saw from Jalon, between the end of the half decision, there's just too much risk mitigation
yeah,
for
I
a
agree.
game that you're down 3 scores. Like, I just don't understand it.
Well, and you look at when you come out from halftime, you get a couple good runs, and then you go over the top and connect to Levi Wentz. And what happened? I mean, it leads to a touchdown.
Mhm.
And so I think you're right on that. I think what I was more talking about was Jalon, when he escapes the pocket and he's trying
Yeah.
to make too much happen and things like that. If he just stands in and delivers and doesn't have all the extra stuff, and I get it's tough, right? That's the edge of the knife that Jalon plays on.
Mhm.
And there are plays that Jalon makes that other quarterbacks in the Big 12 aren't able to make because he's able to elude pressure, get out, stretch plays until the last possible moment, etc. I think standing in the pocket, delivering what's called, etc. I mean, because there was stuff that popped up fairly early on in the concept that he could have completed and could have connected on that would have helped the offense out. I will say though, we're talking about the first half. Going into halftime, as weird as it sounds, I thought the defense was obviously in trouble because they couldn't get stops. But I felt like the offense was going to play better in the second half because I did think in that second quarter, you saw them start to move the ball. You saw them start to have some success. Yes, it didn't result in points, but I did feel like points were coming.
Yeah. I feel like I'm being really cynical, but like it couldn't be worse.
Yeah,
Like to
no,
be fair,
the 0 points.
no,
You
like
can't
I
get
feel like I'm
negative
being super
points. Yeah,
cynical, but like you're right though. There were signs, and it's one of those where, hey, if the field goal isn't tipped or if the snap's not bad and there's not the procedural thing that happens there, man, 17-3, and all of a sudden it's 17-10 coming out of the half, and hey, it's a
yeah,
1-score game, right? And you have a different feeling there. Totally get it. And you're right. Like the offense after kind of the first drive where it wasn't great, it did have 2 decent looks. And then, yeah, right, 2 back-to-back touchdown drives. And
Yeah.
then, and also give some credit to Cole Ballard too
Yeah.
for stepping in, because that was also a bummer of a moment where you're sitting there thinking, man, is that going to be it for Jalon?
Yeah.
And then Cole comes in and obviously does his job, you know. So look,
Ballsy throw, by the way. I mean, he held on to that until the last possible second and took the hit to give his guy every second. So
mm,
yeah, it's funny. I don't want to get into the whole dynamics of the
let's not.
quarterback race after this year. The one thing that I will say is I think a lot of people overlook a lot of things like Cole Ballard's toughness when they're looking into that competition and his place within said competition.
Yeah. And look, he was the guy they leaned on. So that tells you
Yeah,
all you need to know about who the backup quarterback is right now.
yeah,
Isaiah has been used in the packages. He was used earlier in the first half, right before Cole in it.
yeah.
But still, when you need someone to go in and run the offense right now, Cole is the one that coaches are going with. Um, okay, Kevin, we buried the lead too much. Like, let's talk about the Kansas defense.
All
Um,
right.
like I know, we're like we tried to bury the lead here. Okay. Um, what the heck? What the heck? Like,
Yeah. It was another one that there's only so many times you can keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. You brought up the gap integrity. I know we've talked about the fact that KU gives cushion to guys that don't deserve cushion. Iowa State does not have great receivers that I think you need to worry about them getting you over the top typically. I know that Soel did make a nice play down the field, but generally speaking, I don't think that that was a game where you had to play with that level of cushion. And I think the other part about it was we were complaining after the Missouri game saying, you got to get off the field. You got to get off the field. You're getting teams into third down. You got to get off the field. You're getting teams into fourth down. Get off the field. Make one play. And to let Lance Leipold know that we listen to him. He talks all the time about there are maybe 5 plays in a game, right, that can change who wins or loses that game. The problem is you don't really know when they're coming. You get 1 third down stop and you earn a punt. You give up 3 touchdowns on fourth down plays, Swain. Like that's 21 points right there. And I thought you made a good point about the half part too, because I realize we're talking about the defense, but that was one thing that I felt like because of the way the defense struggled in the second half, KU never did, and that was make Iowa State sweat.
mm,
And if you had gone for it at the end of the half, and let's just say you got a field goal, right? Like you didn't get a touchdown, you were able to somehow find a way to get a field goal. You had all 3 timeouts. By the way, KU didn't call a timeout in this game at all in either half. But if you wind up and go and get a field goal, you have that drive to open the second half. It's 17-10. You and I have talked about the way stadium energy changes, right? People start getting a little nervous. Players start looking around like, oh man, we've dominated this game. It's a 1-score game because of the way that Kansas's defense played, especially in the second half. Kansas was never able to get into a spot where the game state stressed Iowa State out. There was always enough of a gap, and then Iowa State would go down and score again, that it never was in that spot. And we talk about, those 5 plays. You make a couple of those plays on money downs, maybe you're in the fourth quarter at 24-21 or 20-17 or something like that, where you have a chance for nerves to affect people, and KU just never got to a spot where Iowa State was uncomfortable.
yeah. Well, it's funny how many parallels you can draw between this game defensively and the Missouri one.
Yeah.
Right? You can talk about fourth down, right? How many plays did Missouri make on fourth down that just killed that game? You can look at the busted runs that Missouri had,
Yeah.
not to the same extent, right? Where Missouri's runs were a lot longer in length, but in terms of that being a recurring issue,
Yep.
KU's linebackers are not in the right gaps consistently. And the secondary, right? It's not just
Yeah,
the linebackers, but like KU does not fit the run consistently. And I have a point on that I'll get to. But then you can look at, okay, Iowa State's receivers are nowhere near as good as Missouri's receivers,
absolutely.
but they treated them the same in terms of the amount of
Yeah,
cushion that they were able to get. And it was one of those comments from Lance Leipold post game that really has stuck with me, where he mentioned that, hey, teams really haven't tested us deep. Well, and then he goes on to say, well, maybe that's because, there's so much cushion in front and they're taking the gimme completions, and those gimme completions are 15-yard outs,
yeah,
you know? And so it's one of those where you watch the defense and there's no pass rush. Rocco Becht's 2.52 seconds to throw, which
yeah,
if you do that over the course of the season, that'd be one of the top 10 fastest time to throws in the country. So KU's pass rush couldn't get home because there was so much cushion and it was easy for Iowa State's
yeah,
wide receivers to get open. So you didn't make Rocco sweat, a guy who is banged up right now. Anyone close to Iowa State would tell you that. You didn't make him sweat. The wide receivers never felt tested. The running backs didn't feel tested. And that's the point, is that Iowa State went into this game and said, we got a decent offensive line. We got some good running backs. We're just going to bet that once every 3 downs, KU's not going to fit it right, and we're going to get a 6-yard run. We're going to get a first down. Iowa State ran the ball 50 times.
yeah,
50. Like, they just dared KU to fit the run consistently, and KU could not do it. And it wasn't even like they ripped off the 75-yard run that Texas Tech did, or anything like that. It was death by 1,000 cuts. They averaged 4.4 yards per rush. But look, when you're able to run it 50 times and have that, mark, well, that's how you end up running for over 200 yards and controlling the clock and keeping KU's offense off the field. So, like, from Iowa State perspective, like, it was a darn good game plan.
yeah,
But also KU did not do much to put, up much resistance. It's just, it's one of those where you're just sitting there watching, like, KU can't stop the run and they can't stop the pass.
yep.
Like, it's hard to get off the field.
And that was to bring it home to a specific example. KU gets the touchdown, cut it 17-7. You're at a point where you're not making Iowa State uncomfortable yet, but a stop and another offensive drive, and Iowa State is second guessing things. Iowa State gets a first down, then gets into 1st and 25.
Oh my God, that was a killer.
And gets into, I think was it 3rd and 14 or 3rd and 12, something like that.
One sec, I'll find
Those are the
it.
plays that you have to get off the field. And I know that we're, just drilling home on this, but at one point, Swain, Iowa State was 9 of 13 on 3rd down. And at that same time, they were 2 for 2 on 4th down. So basically, they were 11 for 13. And one of the two was they kicked a field goal on 4th down. So you basically got one stop, through that stretch. And you have to find a way to get off the field. And that was something they did well against Arizona. Against
Mm.
Arizona, they did a nice job on 3rd down of putting Fafita in uncomfortable positions and things like that. But and to your point about them not getting beat over the top a whole lot, or I guess Lance's point,
Yeah,
technically,
technically
yeah,
it's his point, not mine.
yeah. The times that I can remember them getting beat over the top were when you had Austin Alexander playing press coverage with no safety help.
Chase Brown, yeah.
There is, and it happened a week later too. But I mean, the point that I'm making is, Swain, there's a world of cushion between being way off and having somebody play press coverage with no safety help. I mean, there's a 7-yard cushion. There's all kinds of different things, and I hate taking KU football things and talking about basketball because that's the stereotype, right? Is that KU people are basketball people. Bill Self in, I think it was 21, they were bad defensively that year, the year before the national title. And basically, Self was able to get them playing fairly well at the end of the year. They wound up being pretty COVID ravaged and getting run by
Mm.
USC, obviously.
Yeah.
But I want to say over the last like month or two of the season, they had a top 10 defense. And what Self did was he tweaked the level of drop that David McCormick had, right? Because yeah, you can play drop coverage where, as a center, you're pretty much sitting under the rim, or you can hedge where you're pretty much out past the 3-point line and you can get beat. But there's kind of a world in between there where it's a sweet spot where you're athletic enough to get back to protect the rim, but also, you're not coming at it and, it there's a world in there where it makes sense. And
Mhm.
I'm not sure KU has found that from a cushion standpoint where they can say, okay, on 3rd and 8, Austin Alexander, you line up here so that you're able to contest, at the catch point for something that's around the sticks. They give up way too many completions at or beyond the sticks because of those cushions that you're talking about.
Yeah, and I struggle to figure this out sometimes, is how much of it is scheme and play call
Yeah.
from DK McDonald and how much of it is confidence. And the KU players feeling confident in themselves and their ability to stick with the guy.
Yeah.
That's something Leipold hinted to a month or two ago about that was like, some of it is scheme where there are plays where, yeah, they're going to play quarters and they're going to have them be
Yeah.
15 yards off or 10 yards off or whatever. But then there are times when they should be closer and they're not, and they play off just because of their confidence not being there. And that's the thing, Kevin, right now is like you just look at this defense and you think about the start of the year and the intensity and the confidence it looked like KU was playing with.
Yeah.
You know, that's totally gone. And I
Oh,
think
sure.
I think the Tech game probably is what did it. And yeah, KU had a good game at Arizona for sure. Funny enough, KU did a lot of 4-2-5 in that game, and here we are talking about a game against Iowa State where KU went back to that 5 down front stuff that
Yeah.
you see a lot of busts in. But it's one of those where just the defense does not have much confidence right now. And
Yeah.
so, you know, there's just too much going wrong where you can't really pinpoint one thing or say, okay, well, hey, if you fix this, everything else is fixed. There's just too many issues. And I'll tell you what, that's about as pointed I've seen Lance Leipold talking about a coordinator post game in as long as I can remember. You know,
Well, you think about it, they've been really poor in zone defense. Like that's not a secret. I mean, people have been able to find openings against KU's zone defense all year long. But there was almost and they weren't back to back, but there was a 2-play sequence where, if you remember, Rocco Beck threw the ball over the middle to Carson Hansen for a first down coming out of the backfield. And like it was zone, and KU's linebacker split, and he just went in between the two of them and caught the ball and had a first down. Well, I can't remember if it was later in the drive or I know it was later in the half. I think it's a 3rd down. KU's in man, and Trey Lathan can't get out to cover Carson Hansen in man.
oh yeah,
And when they ran him out of the backfield, I'm not saying that's an easy play to make. What I am saying, Swain, is KU can't cover right now. And I think that a lot of the issues that Kansas has are related to that. I mean, you look at the struggles with the pass rush, you put it really well. Like your pass rush isn't going to get home when Rocco Becht has an open throw that he can make, 2 seconds in. You're not giving those guys a chance to impact the game. With the run game and things like that, sometimes you're pulling guys out of the box to try and help because you can't cover, and you've got a light box, and guys aren't fitting super well anyway. And when you have, say, 6 guys in the box with 6 blockers and then a ball carrier, you're not going to make those tackles. And so I
Mhm.
think a lot of what Kansas struggles with is just the coverage aspect as a whole, and then everything kind of snowballing from that point.
Yeah, and as I'm thinking about it, and I've thought about this a plenty, but like if your secondary is struggling to cover, I look at what Iowa State's done and what Iowa State did on Saturday against KU. Very rarely did you see Haycock bring more than 3,
Yeah.
right? And what they forced Jalon to do, play with a bunch of guys in the defensive backfield and
Yeah.
pick them apart, and he couldn't. And I just look at this defense sometimes, and I wonder, you're rushing 5 guys. You've only got 6 guys for all your different zones, right? Which means you're going to have 2 underneath, 4 at top if you're playing quarters. If you're playing cover 2, right, you're going to have 4 underneath, 2 up. Like, there's just a lot more space to attack.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that you're seeing Dean Miller or Leroy Harris drop into one of those zones sometimes, which is not ideal. But it's one of those where I wonder, Kevin, for KU, is that something that could have been looked at earlier? I don't know.
Yeah.
I look at too, Kevin. I want to know your thoughts on this. Jalen Todd's played almost exclusively now nickel. Said Gibbs now has moved outside. Sowell had the really nice catch over Gibbs, and Gibbs has gotten beat a couple times.
Yep.
I thought Said was really good in the nickel spot.
I
And
agree.
my question is, why have you taken your best outside corner in Jalen Todd, moved him to the inside, and now you're playing guys on the outside who are not as good as Jalen Todd, and a guy who was playing Todd's spot to start the year is now playing on the outside. And I understand Said's got versatility, right? But you spent camp with him competing with Mason Ellis to be the starting nickel. Now neither of those guys are playing that position. And your best coverage cornerback, Jalen Todd, is playing nickel. And he's blitzing. I just in my own head, I'm like trying to make that make sense. And just to me, it doesn't. But I don't know. Like, what do you think about that? Am I crazy for thinking
I'm
that's
right.
just odd?
I'm right there with you, especially since I do think Jalen Todd's a really good outside corner. I do. I think that he's KU's best cover guy. I think he's got a bright future as an outside corner. And to your point, even beyond like the stuff you just talked about, let's talk about Iowa State specifically, right? Iowa State doesn't have just an amazing slot guy that you need Jalen
Kevin,
Todd
they
out
have
there.
2 good wide receivers. That's all they have is 2 good wide receivers. That's it. There's 2.
So if you're asking me and saying, who's the guy that I'm afraid of that can beat us vertically, it's Sowell, right? And the guy who would match up the best with Sowell is Jalen Todd. Like I'm not trying to be tricky about it. I'm just saying Jalen Todd has the length, he has the speed. He's somebody that can get vertical and can run there. Even when he was beat a couple times against Missouri, down the side, it was like a remarkable catch in a ball put in a box like this, type of stuff. And I just think that Todd is more valuable to them as an outside corner where you're playing one of those other guys. I also would have been interested to see if they tried DJ Graham as a nickel. And the reason I say that is I'm not sure that DJ matches up super well with outside receivers. He's a
Physically,
tremendous,
like in terms of just like
yeah,
size and
I think coverage wise, but I do think he tackles really well. If you look at what he's done this year, when people have thrown like bubble screens out at him, when people have done different things like that, he is somebody that I think would maybe trend well. You're not going to do that with a week's time, right? Like there's one game left, but at the same time, yeah, I agree with you, and that I would have kept Jalen Todd out there, and I think even beyond that, if you have Todd out there and you have a level of confidence in him, that allows you to do some other things in terms of maybe you bracket a guy that Austin Alexander is covering on the other end. Maybe you have DJ Graham out there and you feel better about him having some help out there. And so, but especially with this matchup of Iowa State specifically, leaving out the season-long stuff the last few weeks, this is a week that I would have preferred to see Jalen Todd at outside corner, because I think that would have matched up better with what Iowa State had.
yeah. Yeah, like I said, they have 2 good wide receivers. That's it. That's quite literally it.
Yep.
And they've got Bramer, who's a good tight end.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those, and it also doesn't help Kevin that KU safeties have struggled in coverage. Like, look at
Oh,
the
really badly.
first half, the corner route that Bramer runs. Yeah, I think it's the first drive maybe or second drive Iowa State has. Like, I don't know what Lyric's doing. Like, it looks like they're trying to figure out, okay, should the outside guy pass to him or should he carry? And so it's just a miscommunication. And like, there have been so many of that too.
Oh, yeah.
KU safety. So it's just one of those where you can grasp at straws of what the solution is. But I think the problems are just way too broad for Jalon Todd moving outside, right? To be the answer that changes
Oh,
everything for
100%.
Kansas.
Yeah.
But we're talking about marginal gains here. Can you go from giving up 38 to 31, or can you stop a fourth down? It's just stuff like that with the defense where when I'll be blunt, when you're this bad, you got to find just little ways where you can be better.
Yeah, 100%. And on defense, KU has been that bad. And
It's
uh, and so I don't think that that's a secret. I don't think anybody's going to listen to this and clutch their pearls and be shocked that we just said that. But no, you're absolutely right. And when you look at the fact that you're routinely getting teams like Iowa State into third down, into fourth down, what helps you get a couple more third down stops? Like it seems like we're not, asking that much, but Swain, that could have been the difference in 14 points or something like that if you get a couple stops. If you have, and I'm not saying Sowell wouldn't have made a play against Jalon Todd, but if you have Jalon Todd in that situation and Jalon Todd's able to make the play, you get a stop there, and so and you get a stop there. I believe that was the first drive of the second half, going back to the chronological stuff, where if you get a stop on that third down, they're punting it back to you. KU went down and scored after that. If it's 17-14, this is an entirely different game versus Iowa State being able to take that back up to 24-7, and KU again never really applying any pressure on Iowa State.
Exactly. So look, if those were for KU, you got one more game.
Yeah.
Short week. KU practice on Sunday. They have to get ready for a Utah team that, first of all, Kevin, did you catch any of this K-State Utah game? I was in the car
That was
driving back, and so
it
I
was
had it
it was
on.
absolute madness. Somebody said that K-State was the first Power 4 team to rush for 472 yards and lose. I don't know if that's accurate, but that's not great. I mean, it was interesting because so Joe Jackson had just a huge first half for K-State, to the point that I believe he set K-State's, is Jackson a sophomore? I think he set like their sophomore rushing record or something like that in the first half. Like most rushing yards in a game. He had 220 or something like that in the first half. So obviously K-State had every chance to win it, had a 10-point lead with, 4 minutes left, 5 minutes left, whatever it was, and wound up snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. But Utah fights, man. I mean, obviously they weren't good in that game defensively, especially, but they found a way. And I think that when you look at the plays that their quarterback Dampier made down the stretch, he made some really big plays, and that's what I've always felt about this Utah team is basically, if you get Dampier on a night when he's not playing super well, I think Utah is somewhat vulnerable. But when he's making plays like that, I mean, Utah can beat anybody in the Big 12. There's no doubt.
Oh yeah, well, I'm looking up the over/under for this game Saturday. It's 60.
Yeah.
It's 60. So here's some stuff on Utah, some numbers that are just bewildering. They may have the widest against the run versus against the pass splits in the country. So get this. Their EPA play against the run, Kevin, is 135th.
Oof.
Okay. Their EPA per play against the pass is 20th. This is Utah's defense. So they've been good against the pass. They can't stop the run, which is just crazy. And then obviously their offense is insane.
Well, and the run stuff is crazy just because, like, the selling point on Utah, right? Like, the whole thing is, this is a physical program. Like, this is what the like, when you line
hitting.
up against Utah, yeah, you were gonna get beat up, and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying the offense hasn't been that, but defensively, not, that's kinda surprising for the way that Utah's reputation has always
Mm,
been built, that you can't run on Utah, and they're going to run on you.
mm. Which makes this game super interesting,
Yeah.
right? Because is this gonna be like a Daniel Hishaw, Le'Shawn Williams, "Hey, we're going out with the bang" type of game? How much is KU gonna embrace that side of things?
Yeah.
Um, I wonder about that, and then you look at offensively, and it's like, okay, how much is Utah gonna put up against this defense? Because Dampier can run, like,
Yeah.
so you're really not gonna get much of a pass rush because he's gonna be able to evade stuff. Now, look, from what I've seen, and look, I've not been able to watch, like, a ton of Utah, but, like, I don't know if their, like, wide receivers are, like, Missouri level good, but they're solid from what I've seen so far. But it's one of those where you got a great quarterback, a good scheme, gotta see about the right tackle. Fano, I think he got hurt late in the game, so we'll see what his status is this week, but, like, they've got a good offensive line. It's
Yep.
just one of those where I look at this offense for Utah and I'm like, "Uh-oh, they're
Yeah.
putting up 30 plus," and it's a question of for KU, can you find a way to kind of do what Iowa State did to KU to Utah? Or can
100%.
you right, can you hold on to the ball?
Yeah.
You know?
That's KU's shot in this one, I think. It's not Jalon returning to Cincinnati, Jalon, and having 500 yards. I think the way that you win this game is by playing keep away. You line up, you shorten the game, and you find a way to basically hold on to the football. And I thought it was interesting. Chris Kleiman's post game press conference. If anybody hasn't seen it, I highly recommend you go watch it for other reasons. But one of the things that he talked about was they just made the decision they were going to run a gap power at Utah, and he's like, kids bought in. Obviously, they had a ton of success with it. And so I realize to some extent you are what you are, right? Like you run what's in your playbook, you run what you're effective at. It's the end of the year. It's not like wholesale changes coming. But at the same time, I would be very interested to see if KU goes into this game, looks at that, and says something like, we got to get behind Bryce Foster and Kobe Baines and just run this thing out and run a gap power and do a lot of similar things.
Yeah, I mean, that's, it's gonna have to
Kobe's
be a
having a
part
good
of it.
year.
Say it again?
Kobe's having a pretty good year, actually. He's
Yeah.
a guy that pops on tape quite a bit.
Yeah, he's definitely great at well. Amir Herring's gotten better as the year's
Yeah,
gone on too,
he's
so
improved a ton. Herring
yeah,
has.
he has. So it's gonna be big. Look, KU's a 14-point underdog. Like, it's one of those where, like, some weird stuff's gonna have to go KU's way in this game for KU to win. But this is one of those two, Kevin, where what I wanna see is, like, the exact opposite of, like, the intensity level that you saw against Iowa
Yeah.
State. Because if KU goes out there and plays the same intensity level, like, Utah will walk all over KU.
Oh, yeah.
And that's gonna be a really bad look for you're ending the season. It's not gonna be a sellout. Breaking news. Black Friday, 11 a.m., not gonna sell out. But, the crowd, I'm interested to see what it's gonna be like. But it's one of those where if you lay an egg in this game, that's a bad look. Like, it just sets the tone for the offseason, and it's one of those where, KU's gotta go out and fight and really compete to get that 6th win, and if it doesn't, then you've got major concerns about stuff going into the offseason, or at least that's just my opinion. I don't know.
No, I agree with you. This is a culture game, right? And I
Yeah,
think
it's a way to put it.
I think as much as everybody disliked last year going the way that it did and then going 5-7, I
Mhm.
think it was something that they could use as a selling point, to recruits in the transfer portal, all those different things, that they were able to respond and win 3 ranked games when things weren't going their way. And they were
Mhm.
able to say, this is an example of our culture. Guys should have quit, but they did not quit. And I think that when you look at this game, this is it is a culture game. It's one of those where it's I hate to do that. How badly do you want it? But it really is one of those things where you have to show up and be physical because Utah is going to be physical. You
Mm.
have to either accept that challenge upon yourself and say, hey, we're going to go out and be just as physical as you are. We're going to battle and fight it. And for some of these guys, Swain, I don't like talking about legacy a ton, but this is a senior class that they've been here for the rise, right? When you look at guys like Jalon and Highshaw and guys who have been here, and even long-term transfers. If you want to look at Gorska or Kobe Baines or
Sure.
those guys have seen the program rise to what it did, and I think it's kind of a complicated legacy thing if you don't make a bowl and you go out in your junior and your senior year, or for some of these guys, their senior and super senior year, and you don't make bowl games in back-to-back years. If you wind up going to a bowl game, hey, you just made 3 bowls in 4 years. You can hang your hat on that. That's something that KU's only done once before in its entire history. And so you can have that feather in your cap. If you come out and you get smoked by Utah and you don't show up, it's not going to be a good look.
Yeah, we can do some more legacy stuff after next game, but I'll say this. If KU beats Utah, that's Jalon Daniels' best win as KU starting quarterback. That's something I was talking about in the press box with the person I was sitting next to. Like, think back. What's his best win? Texas in 22?
Texas, West Virginia. I do think one game that gets underrated is the Duke win, because Duke won 9 games that year.
Sure. Yeah.
But it was just that at the point that KU beat Duke, like, you didn't have
Sure.
that part of it.
Sure.
It was funny. I thought Houston was awful that year when KU beat Houston. Houston won in 8 games that year.
Yeah, they were also in the that's
No.
yeah.
The other one that I will say, because I realize Jalon has had bigger numbers. Maybe the best I've ever seen Jalon Daniels was Illinois in 23.
That would be up there. That would be up there.
From just a sheer game control, hey, and you had the game on ESPN or ESPN Plus or ESPN2 or whatever it was.
ESPN, yeah.
Yeah. On a Friday night, a lot of people were watching the game, and a lot of people were like, man, like Kansas and just Jalon Daniels, he's so good. So that was one of those two. And then, I mean, the 3 ranked games last year. But again, I tend to put more importance on those than some people do, just because they did still have a bowl game available to them, even though they wound up losing to Baylor. Like when you beat Iowa State, you could have still gone to a bowl. When you beat Colorado, where he was pretty good against Colorado, like I think, and obviously, the punt in the BYU game, you wind up beating BYU with Jalon laying down the perfect punt that was maybe the biggest play of that game. But no, I think he's got some wins. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. And I think the other thing is coaches always talk about leaving things better than where you found it. And obviously KU is better off than when Jalon first came in. I mean, 2020 was absolutely brutal. But the flip side, but the other thing is if he beats Utah to get them the bowl practices that go to Cole Ballard, that go to Zeke Marshall, that go to David McComb, that allows this defense, which could have so many players returning, to continue to develop and all of those things, I think that would be one of the best, quote unquote, leaving things better than you found it actions that a single player could have.
Yeah. I'll save my hot takes for later.
There you go.
Yeah. I think this would be the biggest he's had. And it's one of those two where, like, undoubtedly, like, Jalon's one of the best quarterbacks Kansas football's had.
Yeah.
Right? Like, after Peyton Bender, I love Carter Stanley. Like, good
Carter Stanley had 1 year where he played out of his mind. And
exactly.
That was awesome.
Like,
we all loved it.
The quarterback play at Kansas had been so atrocious for so long that Jalon is the guy that provided that steady presence. You got competent quarterback. It wasn't always pretty and it wasn't always perfect, but you got consistent over the course of a season, competent quarterback play. And that's, I think, what has provided a big platform for KU. And that's what I think his legacy will be, and being that face when KU kind of needed one. And yeah. And Devin Neal is also really good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he was.
I just gotta, that's something that this year I've kind of come around. I'm like, yeah, I didn't give Devin Neal enough credit and I feel bad about it. So you'll be hearing that a lot from me, I think, over the next couple of years as I
Yeah.
get
He
rid of me feeling bad about that.
he
All right,
he's
Kevin,
he's
any
pretty
final
good.
thoughts?
Well, I agree that Devin Neal is very good. That's one of my final thoughts. And Goff, uh, almost jokingly called the booth the house that Devin
Mm,
Neal built. I mean, it paraphrased obviously, but no, I do think that this is a game that has a lot of storylines behind it, has a lot at stake from a bowl standpoint, from a legacy standpoint, from a culture standpoint. And honestly, Swain, all of those things were things that you could have said about Iowa State, and KU no showed to start off the game. And so I think that's wrapping it all into a bow. Is that Iowa State game was one that Kansas had a chance to do the legacy thing, to qualify for a bowl, to have a strong cultural response to the loss against Arizona and all the things that went with it. And you didn't pass that check. And here you have another chance against a better team, and against a team that has strengths that play into KU's weaknesses when you look at how Utah is able to run the ball and run the ball at the quarterback position in particular and all of those things. But ultimately, I think if you come out and play well against Utah and find a way to win that game, then we won't be talking as much about the Iowa State game. If you lose to Utah, then people in the offseason are going to talk about the Iowa State game as the game where you had a chance to do something probably and didn't wind up forget getting across the finish line. You didn't wind up starting at the same time as the other team.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's a good summation. All right. Well, if you want to hear more from Kevin this week, make sure you check out the Pay Heat podcast, Verbal Commitment podcast on the KC Sports Network. National Sign Day is coming up.
Yes.
10 days away, 14 days away. No, 10, 11, whatever. It's a week after the end of the season. It's coming up. So if you want to hear more about kind of the state of recruiting and the state of Kansas, right, where guys are going, and this isn't only about like KUK State, like they do a great job of just covering like, hey, where are guys going? Because you never know where guys end up in the long run too. So make sure you're checking out all the podcasts that Kevin does. Thank you as always for listening to the Fog.net podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave a rating and review, subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video, drop a comment, let us know what you think. That's it. It's maybe our last Sunday night podcast. We'll be back at a different time next weekend to talk more about Kansas football and its ... against Utah. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you all next week.